Empat teras yang menunjangi belanjawan 2020 adalah yang pertama, ekonomi baru era digital. Kedua, pelaburan ke atas rakyat, meningkatkan keupayaan modal insan. Ketiga, mewujudkan bersatu, inklusif dan saksama. Keempat, memulihkan institusi dan kewangan awam.
Good evening. Welcome to Consider This, a special edition for Budget 2020. That was Finance Minister Lim Guan Eng at the tabling of budgets in Parliament this afternoon. Hello, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
And
I'm supposed to
joining us tonight, we have our colleague from Notepad with Ibrahim Sani, none other than
Ibrahim Sani. There you go. Okay, I jumped the gun there. Sorry about
All right, gentlemen, of course, we were just talking about Budget 2020. Let's review this. This is the Pakatan Harapan government's second budget since winning Putrajaya. What are your initial thoughts? Ibrahim, let's start with you.
I think even though the budget is smaller than last year's, the impact is going to be a little bit more resounding. They're targeting certain groups, including youth, including women, that needs to be brought back into the job space. I think those are important areas that we can talk about.
Yeah, it seems to me that they've identified some really important issues and problems and have allocated money to it. But the question is always, will they be able to turn that money into an effective program? Our institutions primed to actually deliver on the vision of the government or its stated priorities. And I think that's always going to be a problem. Lots of aspirations. The question is delivery.
Yeah, in the execution, the devil's in the details in the execution. Now, joining us in the studio today, we have Theresa Goh, transfer pricing leader at Deloitte, Malaysia. Welcome to the show, Theresa. It's good to have you here. Now, what about you? What were your initial responses to Budget 2020? Did it meet expectations?
Well, I think it did meet my expectations because I wasn't expecting a lot because we know that we know all the problems that the world is facing and Malaysia is facing as well. And if you talk about the real impact of the US and China trade war on Malaysia specifically, not so much on the world. I mean that's big, right? I mean it's budgeted to. Is expected to cost as big as Switzerland's economy. I mean it's that the size of amount of losses for the world is huge. But when you look at it and look at the loss to Malaysia, we're impacted because it affects the intermediate market, manufactured goods, right? So for us, many of our manufactured goods are in the E&E industry, etc. So that will definitely hit us very hard.
Some of the big numbers that we can talk about is that the reduction of budget, the deficit isn't meeting the target. Guan Eng was mentioning 3.0 last year was to be the deficit target for 2020. Then turns around, this budget, it says 3.2. What does that mean to the rest of us in Malaysia?
I think it doesn't matter so much as to whether the deficit is going down or not. I think it's more important that we have strategies that are there to encourage or to make sure that there will be growth in the next year. How are we going to generate growth and stimulate the economy in the next year? I think that's more important in light of the downturn in the economy globally.
Yep.
So you had very low expectations. The bar was set low.
Yes.
Did anything surprise you? Were you delighted or surprised or bewildered perhaps by some of the announcements that were made today?
Okay, so when I was reading it, one of the things that I was actually expecting is that, yes, we're finishing the 11th Malaysia Plan, we're embarking into the next 10 years, and that is the shared prosperity vision, right? So when I look at many of the measures that have been announced, it's actually laying the foundation for us to get there. And I think that's good because we have to make sure, like you mentioned earlier, Kuttan, that implementation is the key. So a lot of initiatives here. And if we implement this properly, I think it can boost our investments. It's been very competitive in the world.
Right.
So as a result of the fallout of the US and China trade war, many other countries are drastically reducing their tax rates, like India, Indonesia and all that, to try and attract some of these.
Right.
Yeah. So for us, we cannot afford that, right? So we have come up with a lot of incentives, instead, to try and attract these
Oh,
instead.
we do want to touch on that. You know, as you
Right.
mentioned, there were lots of things announced
Yes.
about making Malaysia an attractive investment destination. But I do want to touch on one thing first as we kind of look at this in a macro picture. You know, Ibrahim, you said that this is a smaller budget, but the reason that is because budget 2019 was was a little bit higher because of that one-off allocation made to the GST fund, also the other tax refunds. Now, we don't have that for this budget, right? There is a shortfall in the GST that remains a challenge for the government to cover. Now, do you think the government has sufficiently addressed that shortfall in budget 2020?
Well, when you talk about, when I look at it, the comparison of, yes, it is a smaller budget, but when I look at the allocation of this budget to operating and development expenditure, I think that's something that I like. Because you can see that it is a bigger sum of it has gone to development expenditure rather than operating expenditure. And that's something that we worry about. So whether it's a bigger deficit or not, as long as the deficit is for purposes of development, then it should be fine. So that has development expenditure now is 18.9, is given 18.9% compared to 17.4% before. And that's an area that we've always been struggling with, you know, in the past budgets as well. How do you cut down the operating expenditure? How do you give more for development, you know, to stimulate the economy, you know, especially when times are going to be tough ahead.
And that's why investment is a key figure. In fact, we have the clip right now with the Finance Minister talking about trying to attract more investment. Let's play the clip.
Bagi mentransformasikan perniagaan tempatan yang terunggul dan berpotensi untuk bersaing dalam pasaran ekspor global. Kerajaan juga akan menawarkan pakej galakan pelaburan istimewa bernilai sehingga 1 bilion ringgit setahun untuk tempoh 5 tahun kepada syarikat tempatan yang layak. Insentif ini adalah bersyarat dan tertakluk syarikat yang dapat membuktikan keupayaan untuk berkembang dan mengekspor produk dan perkhidmatan ke seluruh dunia. Kerajaan menjangkakan langkah ini akan memperkukuh ekosistem rantaian bekalan tempatan dan mewujudkan 100,000 pekerjaan berkualiti tinggi untuk rakyat dalam 5 tahun akan datang.
So that was the Finance Minister talking about incentives involved, particularly in some sectors. One of them is, of course, electronics and electrical engineering, E&E. Theresa, do you think this is going to work, this particular incentive?
I think so. This is it's going to be very, very much welcome by the investors because many of them have been here a long time, right? And they would have enjoyed many rounds of incentives, the pioneer status or IT incentive for the first 5 years, 10 years. And then after that, we had this incentive called reinvestment allowance. So if you expand, you modernize, you automate, you diversify, you get to claim, you know, further incentives for a period of 15 years. So for many companies, this period of 15 years has expired. So which means that if they want to do further investments, they do not enjoy any further incentives.
Theresa, could I just interrupt you very quickly? And why the focus on the E&E? Could you just explain a little bit the contribution of the E&E sector to the Malaysian economy?
Yeah, I think the E&E sector contributes, I think, more than 50% of the manufacturing income for Malaysia. So that's the reason why it is really important for us, to make sure that they stay and they don't go, because we have seen some of them pack up and go off to other countries, where the labor cost is lower and other costs and all that is lower. So we need to remain competitive, and I think one of the ways is to continue to provide further incentives.
Right. What about issues like that are not about fiscal incentives and so on and so forth, but have to do with the quality of our workforce and so on and so forth? Do you think those are being addressed? Because those are seen as some of the structural bottlenecks for the economy, right? In wanting to kind of go up the value chain. Do you see any of that in this budget addressing that?
I think there was some incentive announced. For training the people, and then the company gets a higher deduction for that. So I think it is there. So we are positioning ourselves, our country, for the digital economy, right? So you see a lot of incentives for companies to automate, right? And when they automate, you have to train your people, right? And I think the good thing that I like is actually the reduction of the foreign labor, right? So, so the companies are incentivized, right, to cut foreign labor and replace them with locals or to automate. So I think that's a good move.
You talked a little bit about how, it's a very competitive landscape out there. Now, corporate tax is not really quite addressed in this budget 2020. Do you think it should have been? Should there have been a relook at corporate tax in this budget?
Yes, I think many tax practitioners will tell you that. I mean, when we look at what's happening around the world, like OECD says, it's a race to the bottom. So it used to be like in the 50s, and then now, we're at 24, it's come down by half. And many countries are going down to 20 and even 17, like Indonesia, even 17. India had a huge tax cut recently as well. So it's a race to the bottom, as they say. So I think for Malaysia, we cannot afford to continue to remain at 24. But I suppose the situation is such.
We cannot afford to cut it.
We cannot afford to cut it
because
as
we
well.
need the revenue.
That's right. So we hope that, in the future years, it will gradually, be reduced. Probably acceptable level for now would be about 20. But by the time we're able to do that, other countries may have, moved the goalposts further. So we would have to see.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So do you think that without a corporate tax cut, the incentives are enough to lure these investments in? Because it's either one or the other, right, to remain competitive. What do you think it is?
Yeah, it definitely would be. Because if the incentives are 100% or even 70%, that will, 70% of 24% will be a lot less, right, compared to the others.
Let's address the bottom 40, the B40, because Bantuan Sara Hidup is still front and center in this budget. I have this clip talking about the B40's Bantuan Sara Hidup by the Finance Minister.
Sebagai tambahan, OKU berumur 18 tahun dan ke atas dengan pendapatan kurang daripada RM2,000 sebulan juga layak menerima bayaran BHH. Individu bujang berumur 40 tahun ke atas dan OKU layak menerima sebanyak RM300 dan secara automatik menjadi penerima skim takaful mai salam secara percuma.
Sharaad, you have something on this?
Yeah, Theresa, it seems like the emphasis, and it's a political one, right, of inclusion, of addressing the losers, or those who are lagging behind in our progress. But is there enough to reward the winners, the success stories, the middle class that is in fact the backbone of the country? Have they been missing? Is the M40 kind of neglected child?
I would think so. And M40 is not too far away from B40 as well.
Either.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm
yeah, you're talking about 3,005 to 6 or 6,003 or something like that. So it's not very much in today's terms, right? But one of the surprising things was, which I didn't really expect personally actually, is the increase in the tax rate for chargeable income above 2 million, right? So although it's only going to affect
2,000
people,
right?
so I'm not sure in terms of numbers, but the figure could be huge, you see. Yeah, so hopefully this, we're talking about trying to have all Malaysians, right, have a better quality of living, a better standard of living, etc. So hopefully taking from the rich and giving it, to the not so rich in that sense, right? So more can be done for that.
All right,
for them,
redistributive policies.
Redistribute,
Right,
yes.
that's right. Okay.
Yes.
All right, we're going to come back and continue our analysis on what was announced in Budget 2020 that's coming up. Shortly, thank you so much, Theresa, for joining us. Make sure you stay tuned to consider this.